Cled by mother. The great hall of Lady Eleanor's manor was alive with the sounds of preparation. The servants moved quickly, their arms laden with baskets of vegetables, pitchers of ale, and bolts of linen for the long trestle tables. Outside, the courtyard smelled of roasting meat, and laughter echoed from the stable boys as they carried barrels into the kitchens. In the midst of this busy household, one figure moved with less enthusiasm. Emma, the 20-year-old daughter of Lady Eleanor, lingered at the edge of the hall. Though dressed in a plain rough-spun brown gown with a white apron tied neatly at her waist, she did not carry herself like the other workers. Her dark hair was bound in a thick braid, and her hazel eyes glittered with a kind of mischief. She had grown restless with her duties. Sweeping the floors, polishing the pewter, and serving her mother's noble guests left her longing for excitement. And today, excitement took the form of a locked chest in her mother's chamber. The mischief, jewels hidden away. Lady Eleanor's jewels were famed in the Shire. There was a necklace strung with polished garnets, rings inlaid with sapphires, and a delicate silver circlet that had once belonged to Eleanor's own mother. They shone brightly whenever she wore them at feasts, and Emma had often caught herself staring at them, wishing to feel such finery against her own skin. That afternoon, when her mother had gone to the kitchens to oversee the meat roasting, Emma crept up the stone stairway to the ladies' chamber. The wooden chest stood against the far wall, heavy and carved with roses. Her fingers shook as she lifted the lid. Inside, among folded silks and small embroidered pouches, the treasures gleamed. Emma gasped softly, then bit her lip to stifle the sound. Carefully, she lifted the garnet necklace and slipped it around her throat. It rested warmly against her skin, glittering even in the dim light from the narrow window. She slipped a ring onto her finger, admiring her reflection in the small polished bronze mirror. The thrill of wearing them was intoxicating. She laughed to herself and decided she would hide them away for a little while, just for her secret pleasure. Behind a loose stone in the hearth of her small chamber, she tucked the necklace and ring, certain no one would notice. What she did not realize was how swiftly Lady Eleanor would. Discovery, mother's suspicion. By evening, the noblewoman was dressed for inspection of her hall. She wore a gown of deep green velvet, her auburn hair bound with a golden fillet. When she opened her chest to choose her jewels, her sharp eyes instantly saw what was missing, her lips pressed into a thin line. She summoned the nearest servant and demanded if anyone had been in her chamber. The servants bowed low, swearing innocence. Yet one of them stammered that Emma had been seen climbing the stair not long before. Lady Eleanor's suspicion hardened. She descended the stairs, her steps deliberate, and found her daughter polishing a pewter plate at the far table. "Emma," she said, her voice cold and measured. "Come to me." Emma froze, the cloth stilling in her hand. She turned slowly, her cheeks already pale. "Yes, mother? You know what I keep in my chest. Tell me now, without lies, where are my jewels?" The girl's mouth opened, but no words came. She shook her head quickly. I do not know. Perhaps a servant," but Lady Eleanor's gaze was piercing. "Do not trifle with me. I see your guilt in the way you cannot meet my eyes. You shall learn what deceit earns in this house." The dungeon, preparing for discipline. With no more words, the lady seized her daughter's wrist and drew her through the hall. The servants bowed their heads, pretending not to hear the heavy tread of their mistress's slippers on the stone floor as she dragged Emma toward the lower stair. The descent into the dungeon was chilling. The torches sputtered in iron brackets along the wall, sending wavering shadows across the damp stones. The air smelled of moss and old water, and the sound of dripping echoed faintly in the chamber. At the far end stood a heavy oak bench and a small table where Lady Eleanor kept a few instruments for correction. Among them were slender switches, a wooden paddle, and, strangely, a bundle of goose feathers tied together with leather cord. Emma's eyes widened as her mother pushed her down to sit on the bench. Lady Eleanor's velvet gown rustled as she reached for the feathers. "You think deception brings pleasure," she said, her voice low but sharp. "Tonight you will learn that dishonesty brings only humiliation." The tickling discipline. Before Emma could protest, her mother tied her wrists with rope to the back of the bench so she could not escape. The bonds were not cruelly tight, but firm enough to hold her in place. Lady Eleanor leaned close, her eyes steady on her daughter's face. "You will laugh, child, but your laughter will be no joy. It will remind you of your folly." She took the feathers in hand and slid them lightly beneath Emma's chin, then down her neck. The girl gasped and jerked, a helpless giggle breaking from her lips. "Mother, please, not this," but the noblewoman ignored her. She traced the feathers under her arms, across her sides, and down to the soles of her bare feet. Emma's laughter grew wild and uncontrollable. She writhed against the ropes, her braid falling loose, her face flushed red. "Where are my jewels?" Eleanor demanded, her voice carrying over her daughter's helpless laughter. Emma shook her head violently, trying to resist, but the relentless tickling left her powerless. Tears sprang to her eyes as the torment continued. The feathers brushed across her ribs again, and she screamed with laughter, gasping for breath. "Stop! Stop, I cannot bear it." "Confess then," her mother said, moving the feathers back to her underarms. Finally, through hiccups of laughter, Emma cried out, "Behind the stone. In my chamber's hearth. I hid them there." The confession. Lady Eleanor stopped at once. She dropped the feathers onto the table and untied her daughter's wrists. Emma slumped forward, trembling, her cheeks streaked with tears from both laughter and shame. The noblewoman stood tall, her gown sweeping the floor as she turned toward the stairs. "You will fetch them now. And you will remember this night each time you are tempted by what is not yours." Emma hurried up from the dungeon, still rubbing her sore wrists. She went directly to her chamber, pulled free the loose stone, and retrieved the garnet necklace and ring. Quietly, she returned them to her mother's outstretched hand. The aftermath. Later, in the flickering candlelight of her chamber, Lady Eleanor locked the jewels safely into the chest once more. She turned, her expression stern but calm. Emma stood silently, her braid undone, her simple gown wrinkled from her struggle. She lowered her gaze, unable to meet her mother. "Says, your laughter was loud enough for all the servants to hear," Eleanor said. "Let it remind you of your folly. You are my daughter, and I expect better. Do not make me teach you this lesson again." Emma bowed her head. "Yes, mother. Forgive me." The noblewoman regarded her for a long moment, then blew out the candle. The chamber fell into darkness, and the only sound was the faint rattle of the lock as the jewels were sealed away once more, and Emma, cheeks still burning, knew she would not soon forget the humiliation of being tickled into obedience by her mother in the cold dungeon below.